My name is Claire Hendricks. I am 32 years old, and for most of my life, Thanksgiving smelled like my brother's success and my silence. That November in Austin, I told myself it would be different. I told myself I was strong enough to sit at that table and feel nothing when they looked past me again. But when my father stood up and lifted his glass and said the words he said, something in me stopped pretending. I stood up. The room went quiet, and by the time the night was over, nothing in my family would ever be the same again. What would you have done if you were sitting in my chair? Stay with me, because this story begins long before that dinner table, and it ends somewhere I never expected to find myself finally free. Let me take you back to where it started. Austin in late November carries a warmth that most cities don't get in fall, the kind where you can still sit on the porch in a light jacket and watch the pecan trees drop their last leaves in slow, golden circles. My parents' house on Ridgemont Drive always looked its best that time of year. Porch lights glowing amber, the front door draped in a wreath of dried orange slices and cinnamon sticks my mother made every year. Inside, the smell of brown sugar, sweet potatoes, and roasting turkey would curl through every room, and for a few hours it was possible to believe that everything inside those walls was warm too. I was 8 years old the first Thanksgiving I understood what I was to my family. My brother Marcus was 11, broad-shouldered even then, easy with his laughter, the kind of boy whose smile made adults stop what they were doing and lean toward him. My grandmother Rose had flown in from Nashville, and she sat in the good armchair by the window with her hands folded in her lap, watching all of us the way she always did, quietly and completely. When it came time for my father to announce the family's achievement of the year, I pressed my hands together under the table. I had won the regional science fair that spring. My project on water filtration had placed first in my age group and second overall. I had a ribbon in my bedroom that I had hung above my desk. My father cleared his throat and grinned. He said this year, the family was celebrating Marcus, who had organized his school's food drive and collected over 400 canned goods. The room erupted. Uncles clapped. My aunt said things like, "That boy has a gift for people." My mother's eyes shimmered. Marcus dipped his head modestly, and then looked straight at me with an expression that wasn't modest at all. I smiled. I kept my hands flat on my thighs and I smiled until my face hurt. Later, after the pie was served, my grandmother Rose found me on the back steps. She sat down beside me without asking, pulling her cardigan close against the evening air. She smelled like lavender powder and something warm I could never name. She did not say anything at first, just looked out at the darkening yard where the fireflies were winking on in the grass. After a while, she said, "Some people shine loud, baby. You shine quiet. The quiet kind lasts longer." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I leaned against her shoulder and she let me stay there until my mother called us in for leftovers, and for a little while the ache in my chest loosened just enough to breathe. The years after that followed the same pattern so reliably that I almost stopped noticing. Almost. Every Thanksgiving, my father found a new reason to celebrate Marcus. At 13, Marcus started a food blog that their friends passed around like something precious. At 16, he had a following. At 18, sponsored posts. By the time I graduated high school with a 4.1 gigapascal and a full scholarship to UT Austin for computer science, Marcus had 40,000 followers on 2 platforms, and my parents had paid for a professional camera setup, a ring light, 3 online courses in content creation, and a trip to New York so he could attend a food and media convention. My graduation gift was a card with $60 in it. I'm not telling you this to sound bitter. I tell you because you need to understand the soil that everything else grew out of, the years of invisible accumulation, the way you learn to keep your accomplishments small and quiet because making them known only highlights the contrast. I learned early to absorb and endure. I thought that was strength. I was wrong about what strength actually looked like. College opened something in me. Away from that house, away from the constant background hum of being second, I expanded. Computer science clicked for me in the way that nothing else ever had. The clean logic of systems. The way problems had real solutions if you were patient enough to follow the trail. I stayed late in labs. I built things. By my junior year, I had a research position, and by graduation, I had 2 job offers from companies I had admired since high school. I took a position at a software firm downtown, and within 3 years, I had built a tool for automated network diagnostics that the engineering team adopted company-wide. My manager at the time, a direct, fair woman named Janet, told me I was being considered for a senior engineering role. It was the first time I had heard those words from someone in a professional context and felt the ground under me go solid. I called home to tell my mother. She listened, and then she said, "That's great, honey." And then she said, "Oh, did you see Marcus's video from the weekend? He hit 300,000 subscribers." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and watching the neighbor's cat walk along the fence outside my window. I said, "That's great," she said. "We're just so proud of him." I said, "I know." I hung up and poured myself a glass of water and drank it in 3 swallows. That was the autumn before the Thanksgiving that changed everything. It started with a message from someone I didn't know. A developer at a mid-sized company in Dallas sent me a connection request on LinkedIn with a note attached. He wrote that he had heard some concerning things about the quality of my work and wanted to verify before proceeding with a potential collaboration. I read the message 3 times. I had never met this person. I had no idea what he was referring to. I responded professionally, asked for clarification, and he sent back a screenshot of a review posted on a developer forum I barely used. The review was under my name and email handle, and it described a professional interaction where I had supposedly submitted incomplete code, billed for hours I hadn't worked, and then gone silent when asked to fix the errors. None of it had happened. None of it was true. I reported the post and had it taken down, but something in my stomach had curdled. That same week, Janet called me into a brief meeting and said, gently, that there had been some chatter. Nothing specific she could point to, just impressions from outside the company, and that while she, personally, had complete confidence in my work, the senior role decision had been pushed to the following quarter. "Impressions," she said. She looked uncomfortable using the word. I drove home that night with both hands tight on the wheel. Impressions from where? From whom? A month later, a former colleague named Drew, who had been consulting on a data infrastructure project I was hoping to join as a contractor, sent me a brief, apologetic email. He wrote that he had received information suggesting I had a pattern of missing deliverables, and that the project lead had decided to bring someone else on. He said he was sorry, and that he hoped it was a misunderstanding. I called him immediately. He hesitated on the phone in a way that told me he knew more than he was willing to say. I sat at my desk that night and opened every professional profile I had. I combed through forums, review boards, LinkedIn comments. I was a software engineer. I knew how to follow digital trails better than most people. It took me 4 hours, but I founded a profile on a developer review site with a username I didn't recognize that had left 3 separate negative assessments of my work over the past 8 months. The assessments used specific enough language to seem credible, but were vague enough that they couldn't be fact-checked. The profile was sparse, created recently, following only a handful of accounts. One of them was my brother Marcus. I stared at that for a long time. I told myself it was a coincidence. Marcus had hundreds of thousands of followers. He followed people back indiscriminately. It meant nothing. I closed the laptop and went to bed and lay awake for 2 hours telling myself it meant nothing. The thing that made me stop telling myself that was something I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Sunday in late October, and I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off a birthday gift for my mother. I let myself in through the side door the way I always did, and I heard voices from the kitchen. I moved down the hallway with my keys still in my hand, and I heard my brother's voice, low and certain, and carrying the particular quality of someone saying something they would not repeat in polite company. He said, "She's not going to take this from me. She was always trying to outshine me. I'll make sure that doesn't happen." My mother said something quiet I couldn't fully catch. Then my brother laughed, and the sound was so familiar and so wrong that I stood there in the hallway for a full 10 seconds before I turned around and walked back out the side door. I sat in my car in their driveway for a long time. The pecan tree in the front yard dropped a single leaf onto my windshield. I watched it slide down the glass. I called my best friend Priya that evening. We had been close since our first year at UT. 2 engineers who had bonded over terrible campus coffee and a shared conviction that sleep was overrated. She was sharper than almost anyone I knew, and she had gone into cybersecurity, which meant she understood better than most people what a determined person could do with a keyboard and bad intentions. She came over the following weekend. She sat at my kitchen table with her laptop and her coffee, and she listened to everything without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her. When I finished, she looked at me steadily and said, "Okay, let's find the trail." We worked through the afternoon. Priya had methods I wouldn't have thought to try. She cross-referenced the review site profile creation date with the timing of my first lost opportunity and found they lined up within a 5-day window. She traced a burner email address connected to the account to a device that had pinged a cell tower 2 blocks from my brother's apartment in South Austin on the day the profile was created. She found that the same email address had been used to contact Drew's project lead 3 weeks before Drew's message to me. Then she found the message. 6 months earlier, my boyfriend at the time, a landscape architect named Eric, had received what appeared to be a text from my number. The message implied I had been dishonest with him about something that happened on a work trip, specific enough to be believable, vague enough to be unfalsifiable. He had never shown it to me. He had grown distant after that, and 3 months later he had ended things with a careful, sad explanation about needing space and questioning our connection. I had cried for 2 weeks and assumed I had somehow failed without knowing how. Priya pulled up the metadata on the message through a mutual contact in telecommunications security. The text had not come from my phone. It had been routed through a spoofing service. The account that had purchased the spoofing service had been linked to a payment method registered to my brother's business email. I sat very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped. She's not going to take this from me. I thought about the 8-year-old girl sitting on the back steps with a ribbon no one had asked to see. I thought about $60 in a card. I thought about Eric standing in my doorway telling me he needed space, his eyes full of something I now understood was not confusion but betrayal, a betrayal that had been manufactured for him. I thought about my grandmother Rose and her hands folded in her lap, and the way she had said the quiet kind lasts longer, and I had taken that as comfort when maybe she had also been trying to warn me. Priya looked at me across the table. She said, "This isn't coincidence, Claire. This is a pattern." And then she said, "We can do something about this." I asked her what that looked like. She said we build the case the way we build anything else, methodically, completely, so that when it's presented there is no room for doubt. She said we document everything. We preserve the originals, we make copies, and then we decide when and how. I thought about my parents' house on Ridgemont Drive. I thought about the table that seated 20 every Thanksgiving. I thought about the fact that this year's dinner was also my grandparents' 55th anniversary celebration, which meant the entire extended family would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, the pastor from my parents' church, the neighbors from 3 doors down who had known us since I was in diapers. I thought about my brother standing at the head of that room while everyone applauded. I told Priya I knew exactly when. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear, the kind of Austin November day that surprises you with its bite. I drove to my parents' house with my phone charged and every file organized in a folder I had triple-checked the night before. Every screenshot, the metadata report Priya had compiled, the connection between the spoofing service and Marcus's business account, the timeline of the fake reviews and their correspondence with my lost opportunities. A written summary Eric had agreed to provide after I called him, carefully and honestly, and told him what had happened. He had gone very quiet on the phone, and then he had said, "I'm so sorry. I should have come to you. I should have asked." The house was full by the time I arrived. My aunt's car was in the driveway beside my grandparents' rental. Through the front window, I could see people moving around the living room, cousins I only saw twice a year. My grandmother rose in her good chair by the window exactly as she had always been. The smell of the turkey and the sweet potatoes hit me on the front porch, and for a single, disorienting moment, I was 8 years old again, pressing my hands together under the table, waiting. I went inside. Marcus was in the center of the living room, phone out, tilting it toward a spread of appetizers my mother had arranged on the coffee table. He was narrating something quietly to his camera, smiling at the lens the way he smiled at everything open, practiced, effortless. My mother hovered nearby, straightening things that didn't need straightening. My father stood with my uncle by the fireplace, deep in conversation about something. My grandmother Rose caught my eye across the room and gave me the particular look she had been giving me my whole life. Steady and knowing and full of something she never needed to put into words. I found a seat near the end of the long table when we moved to dinner. I set my phone face down beside my plate. The food was passed, the glasses filled, and the noise of a large family eating and talking rose and filled the room the way it always did. And I sat inside it the way I had always sat inside it, present and invisible at the same time. My father stood when the main plates were nearly cleared. He was a tall man who had always commanded a room easily, and the table quieted around him with a speed that still, after all these years, made something tighten in my chest. He said he wanted to take a moment, on this special occasion of his parents' anniversary, to celebrate what this family had built. He looked around the table. He said there was one person at this table who represented everything he and my mother had hoped to raise. Someone who had shown that passion and dedication and authentic connection with the world could build something real. He paused. He lifted his glass. He said, "To Marcus, who just crossed 500,000 subscribers and signed his first national brand partnership. We are so proud. You are exactly who we always knew you'd be." The table erupted. Glasses rose. My uncle let out a loud, appreciative sound. Cousins clapped. My mother pressed her hand to her heart. Marcus stood, actually stood, and gave a small, humble bow, his phone already angled to capture the reaction around him. I looked at my grandmother Rose. She was looking at me. I picked up my phone. I opened the folder. I pressed send. Every person at that table who had a smartphone received the files within the next 15 seconds. I had compiled them into a single link that Priya had helped me format clearly, each piece of evidence labeled and explained in plain language. The subject line read, "Something you should know about the past year." The first buzz went off near my aunt, then two more in quick succession. Then the sound spread down the table like a wave, phones lighting up, faces dropping toward screens, the celebratory noise dying away one conversation at a time. Marcus's bow faltered. He looked toward his own phone. His face changed. My father was still standing, his glass still raised, his expression shifting from warm to uncertain. He looked at me. I held his gaze. My cousin, near the center of the table, said, quietly, "This says he planted fake reviews." My aunt on the other side said, "What is this email? Who is Drew?" Marcus set down his phone. His voice came out sharp and defensive. He said, "This is ridiculous." He said, "She has been jealous of everything I have built since we were kids." He said, "Do not believe this." I said his name. I said it once, calmly. I said, "Explain the metadata on the spoofing service. Explain why the account that paid for it is registered to your business email. Explain why Eric received a fabricated message the week before he started pulling away from me." The table was completely silent. Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked to my mother. She had stood up, her face pale, her hands gripping the back of her chair. She said, "Claire, this is not the time or the place." She said, "This is your grandparents' anniversary." She said, "How could you do this tonight?" I said, "You're right that it's their anniversary. I want them to know who they're celebrating at this table." My grandmother Rose's voice came from her chair, quiet and carrying the way it always had. She said, "I think we should read what was sent." My mother said, "Mom." My grandmother said, "Let the room read it." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight, the kind where you can hear the candles burning. People bent toward their phones. My uncle exhaled sharply. One of the family friends my parents had invited, a woman who had known us for 20 years, looked up at Marcus with an expression I had never seen her direct at him before. Marcus said, "She made this up. She's a software engineer. She can manufacture anything." He looked around the table, still working the room the way he had always worked every room. He said, "You all know what she's like. You all know how this has always been between us." My cousin, the one who had always been closest to him, set his phone down slowly. He said, "Marcus, the IP address is in here. I work in tech. I know what this means." Marcus's composure cracked. He said, "You don't know everything that happened." He said, "You don't know what she's been doing, how she's been trying to take credit for things." His voice rose and then stopped, as if he realized he had no sentence to finish. My father had sat back down at some point. He was holding his phone with both hands. His face had the look of a person reading something they had been hoping didn't exist. He set it down and pressed his palms flat on the tablecloth, and I watched him look at my brother and look at me and look at my grandmother Rose, and then look at the center of the table where no one was. He said, "Marcus, did you do this?" Marcus did not answer. My father said his name again, differently. Marcus said, "She was going to take the senior role. She was going to get the spotlight." She was always his voice broke on the last word. He stopped. He picked up his phone, and then he put it back down. In my peripheral vision, I saw two of my aunts exchange a look. My mother was crying. She was trying not to, pressing her fingers to her lips, but her eyes were wet, and her face was working. She looked at Marcus. She looked at me. She said, "I didn't know." And something in her voice, some specific quality of grief and shock, made me believe her. I believed her, and it did not change anything fundamental, but it was something. My father turned to me. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. He said, "Claire." His voice was low. He said, "I have not paid enough attention." He said it slowly, as if each word was a decision. He said, "I owe you more than I can say at this table." Marcus stood up. His chair scraped back hard. He said, "I can't believe this." He picked up his phone and his jacket from the back of his chair, and he walked toward the front door without stopping, and the sound of it closing behind him was the only loud thing in the room. My grandmother Rose said, "Come here, baby." I got up and walked to her chair. She took my hands in hers, and they felt the same way they had always felt, dry and warm and sure, and she looked at me the same way she always had, as if she had been watching something long and difficult finally resolve into what it had always been trying to be. She said, "The quiet kind lasts longer. I always knew you'd prove it." The weeks after Thanksgiving unfolded the way the end of a long illness does, with a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. Marcus's brand partnership dissolved before December. The announcement came through a brief public statement from the company about values and integrity. His subscriber count dropped quickly as the story circulated through the creator community, the kind of drop that doesn't recover. The fake review profiles were taken down after Priya assisted me in filing formal reports with the platforms. Drew reached out to apologize and said he'd be glad to collaborate if I was still interested. I said I'd be in touch. At the firm, Janet called me into her office in early December. She had seen the documentation I had shared through a contact she knew who was connected to the developer forum where the fake reviews had appeared. She looked at me across her desk with the expression of someone deciding how much to say. She said the senior role was mine if I still wanted it. She said she was sorry for the delay. I told her I appreciated it. I accepted. Eric came by on a Saturday with coffee from the place near my apartment that he had always known I preferred. He stood on my porch and he said he was sorry 3 times in 3 different ways, and I could see that he meant it. And I could also see that too much had shifted between us for simple apology to bridge it. I told him I didn't hold it against him. I told him that was true, because it was. We stood there for a while in the cool December air, and then we said goodbye in the way you say goodbye when you both know it's the last time. My father called me the Sunday after Thanksgiving. He called me again the Sunday after that. He was not a man who had ever been comfortable talking about the interior of things, and those early calls were awkward and halting, full of long pauses and small subjects. But he kept calling. And I kept answering. I don't know what we are building yet. I don't know if it can become what I needed it to be 20 years ago. But it is something. And something, after a long nothing, is not nothing at all. My grandmother Rose flew back to Nashville in early December, and I drove her to the airport. We sat in the terminal together for an extra 45 minutes because her flight was delayed, and we ate the worst airport sandwich either of us had ever tasted and laughed about it, and she told me about the first year of her marriage, a story I had never heard, full of small fights and wrong turns, and one very cold winter when they had almost given up. She said the thing that held them together wasn't that they were perfect for each other. She said, The thing that held them together was that they both believed the work was worth doing. I thought about that for a long time after I drove home. I sat in my apartment with the lights low and my coffee warm, and the sound of the city coming in faintly through the window. And I thought about what it means to believe that work is worth doing. Not the work of changing other people. Not the work of earning recognition from people who have decided not to see you. The work of building something real with your own hands, for reasons that belong entirely to you. I had been doing that work for years without knowing it. The tools I had built, the problems I had solved, the late hours and the failures and the attempts that finally stuck, none of that had been witnessed by the people I had wanted most to witness it. I had lived for a long time as though their attention was the measure of the work's worth. It wasn't. It never had been. I promoted Priya to the top of my contacts and started texting her approximately twice as often as I had before. I joined a recreational volleyball league on Wednesday evenings and was genuinely terrible at it for the first month, and marginally less terrible after that. I rearranged my apartment to fit a proper standing desk in the corner where I had been stacking boxes for 2 years. Small things. Real things. By the time my birthday came around in February, I didn't want anything large. I invited Priya and 2 other friends and my grandmother Rose, who flew in for the weekend and brought a lemon pound cake wrapped in foil and tied with a yellow ribbon. We ate takeout Thai food on my living room floor with the coffee table pushed to the wall, and my grandmother told 3 stories in a row that had us all laughing until someone spilled their drink, and Priya made a toast that was sincere and slightly embarrassing and exactly right. Late that night, after everyone had gone and the apartment was quiet, I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of chamomile tea and looked out at the city lights scattered across the dark. I thought about the girl on the back steps counting fireflies while the sound of applause came through the screen door. I thought about how long she had been waiting for someone to come outside and tell her she was seen. I thought about the fact that she had been the one to do it, in the end. She had been the one to put the files in a folder, to press send, to stand up from the table, to look her father in the eye and let the room see what had been invisible. That was not revenge. That was not bitterness. That was just finally refusing to be small. If you were sitting in my chair that Thanksgiving evening, when the toast was raised and the glass went up and your name was nowhere in the room, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And if this story found you at a moment when you needed it, stay with us. We tell these stories because some truths take courage to speak, and because you are never as alone in yours as the silence tries to make you feel.